It's a healthy thing to have a conversation in our society about what stories get attention and what don't. Here are some massive stories you've heard in the news. Did you know that this was going on at the same time and it received no attention? I'd like to see some stories from the national media about who else went missing this week and maybe some similarities.
In this new episode, we speak with our friend, Dr. David Perlmutter, about the mysterious disappearance and really abduction of Nancy Guthrie from Catalina Foothills on February 1st, 2026. And Lance, as always, with Dr. David Perlmutter, we get into these stories using a media lens.
Exactly. Dr. Perlmutter is welcome to come on the show anytime we have these current event stories that we sort of need to get to the bottom of how they're being delivered to us by way of the media. So he's the perfect candidate to have on who can break it down for us. Nancy Guthrie's abduction, number one, is super tragic. It's also just absolutely ripe for a media frenzy. It's interesting to hear David's perspective on this, especially since he teaches students from a completely different generation, how they are starting to come around and understand how media can manipulate certain narratives. Not saying they're manipulating narratives here, but he's been noticing certain trends and patterns in his students when they're questioning why they're being told what they're being told by way of the major media networks. And this is one of the examples. Nancy's abduction, again, of course, is super tragic, but how we're getting that information is also very important to know.
Absolutely. And of course, this is a story that is having updates every day. Keep in mind that this conversation was recorded on February 12th, and hopefully we are mostly up to date with this story in this conversation. So if you have any information, please call the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. You could also visit tips.fbi.gov. Okay, so let us know what you think of this conversation on Spotify or YouTube. We are going to break quick for commercial here, and we'll be right back with Dr. David Perlmutter.
And we're back with Dr. David Perlmutter to talk about the abduction of Nancy Guthrie.
Welcome back to the podcast, David Perlmutter. David, how are you today?
Very good. Thank you, sir.
I'm sure there are probably like 2 or 3 people out there who are thinking to themselves, who is this David Perlmutter? Is he a professor? Is he a doctor? Is he both? Is he in Texas? You might as well be the third host of this show. We've had you on so many times. I'm sure there are a couple people out there who need to know who Dr. David Perlmutter is. Would you mind giving a little intro for the listeners?
Can we really know another human being? That's a very professor thing to say. My name is David Perlmutter, and I'm a professor at Texas Tech University in the College of Media and Communication, and I've been studying media, political communication, violence, war, the media, and police and law enforcement for a long time. And I'm always grateful to join you to talk about the media world around true crime.
Great. And I will encourage anybody who's listening now who hasn't heard you on one of these episodes to just go back in the catalog, maybe do a search for David Perlmutter and listen to some of the previous episodes. For the most part, we talk about current true crime, newsworthy stories, and we have you on to break it down from that media perspective. And that's not something that I feel like we get often in what we do. A lot of what we do circles around speculation. Oftentimes we'll discuss something with somebody and it's a what if scenario, but you really take it from like, hey, we're being presented information. How do we digest this? So I do encourage people to go back and listen to your previous episodes.
A couple of years ago, as you all may know, I wrote a book about police work and the media, but I also was invited to be an advisor for the National Police Museum's exhibit on police and the media. in my research for that and what subsequently became the exhibit, I was interested that media coverage of what we call true crime today or crime news goes back a long, long, long time. The saturation coverage of the Jack the Ripper case is probably one of the things people may just know about because they've maybe seen newspaper headlines from the time of Jack the Ripper in London. But you can go back to famous murders or missing in the 15th century. And what they had that was the media of the time, often prints, the equivalent of paperback or pulp books or posters. So there's just always been some, for a long time, media related to murder, mystery, and mayhem. It just seems like it's the overwhelming product of our modern world, but there are antecedents from the past.
Yeah, well, it is an interesting genre to be in. I mean, it turns into history not long after being published. So today, with you, Dr. David Perlmutter, we are going to speak about the abduction of Nancy Guthrie. 84-year-old mother of three, Nancy Guthrie, was abducted from her home in the early morning hours of February 1st, 2026. And her home exists in Catalina Foothills, Arizona. And of course, her daughter is the co-anchor of the very popular morning news show Today. That's Savannah Guthrie. And so Savannah and her siblings have urged this kidnapper to be in contact with them because there were some ransom demands that were sent to media outlets. So this is a weird part of the story because it doesn't seem like the Guthrie family or law enforcement has actually had communication with this kidnapper, at least that we know of for sure. It's possible. I don't think that ransom that was sent to the media is even confirmed to be from the kidnapper. We're in a tough situation. And as we record this, I believe we're 12 days out from when Ms. Guthrie was abducted. Earlier this week, there was some video and photos released of this person who broke into her house. He is a masked man wearing gloves. Much has been made about his outfit. There was a search yesterday that actually turned up either one or two gloves about a mile and a half away from Nancy's home. And they were black rubber gloves, it looked like. And it looked like it could definitely have been the abductor's glove. But I don't think at this point there's been any confirmation that it was or wasn't.
I just want to add before we get too far into it, right as close to the top of the episode as possible, if anyone has any information, they're encouraged to call the Pima County Sheriff's Department at 520-351-4900 or the FBI tip line at 1-800-CALL-FBI. CALL-FBI.
And as far as the media coverage of Nancy's disappearance and abduction, it has been, I think it's safe to describe it as a bit of an explosion. As we're speaking right now, I'm looking at live update pages on Yahoo, NBC, CNN. There's at least 3 that are updating live multiple times per day. Okay, so let's turn it over to you, David.
This case is probably a great example that I'm going to bring up in classes the next time I teach and get a chance to build a new syllabus with a module in it, because it is the convergence of so many media trends and also sort of classic tropes and aspects of true crime. Right. So let's just talk about media trends. Like we have studied ever since media began, but most prominently in the age of television and then the age of the internet and social media, about what's called parasocial interaction, which is basically people identifying with or disliking characters they see on television. So I'm old enough to remember, and by the way, I promised myself to only say that once per show, but I'm old enough to remember when there were stories that a soap opera villainess, I think my younger students, they do know about soap operas from K-drama and from telenovelas. They don't know much about the American history of soap operas, but there used to be these long-running soap operas where they would run so long that the same villainess would get married 12 times and, kill 6 of her husbands and break up 50 marriages. And they'd go shopping at the local supermarket. The actress would go shopping and somebody would come up to them and throw a squash at them saying, "How dare you break up Valerie and Tim's wedding? That you're so evil." Look, so people have always confused fictional characters with real people. Also, in the news industry, especially for morning shows, like Good Morning America is a very good example, they spend a lot of effort finding and maintaining somebody that they feel that the audience can wake up with in the morning. There's a special personal relationship that's maybe not as strong in the evening news broadcasts or like daily broadcasts, but like the morning show host. And we have a long history, like Katie Couric publicly talked about the illness of her husband. Her ratings went up. Now, that wasn't intentional, but like people wanted to know about her personally. And right now, with Ms. Guthrie, the daughter and the mother, she had her mother on the show. It was part of her identity. The average viewer and demographic of the morning show tends to be a middle-aged or older woman who's watching the show. So there's just a lot to identify with there. So the prominence of the victim is already sort of built into the system, that this would have happened for any other morning show. It really plays into how people care about characters. And then the last little part is who's the true crime audience? Not all, but a very strong majority of true crime are women demographically. And they're also people who are interested in, morning show. I mean, part of the demographic, the older woman, middle-aged and older woman, younger woman, not necessarily, but in terms of ratings and attention, it fits that this become a saturation story. And then, as you've said, there's just all these details keep dropping, which make it a movie of the week in terms of like, oh, what's the black gloves and the video. So there's just a lot to pay attention to here.
I just want to add a couple things on what you just said. I never thought about that personal interaction that people have with the morning show host and how it's different from an evening show host. Like the morning show host is there, you turn on the TV and they're waiting for you, so it becomes part of your routine first thing in the morning. It's one of the first things you do. So I can totally see how psychologically that becomes a personal connection because they are there and they're almost waiting for you. So great observation there. I think you're right on. I also want to make a correction because you said there's a lot of information that's swirling out there. We had another episode where we were giving some facts on this. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we had said, based on news and media outlets detailing the disappearance and timelining it out, we had said that Nancy failed to show up the next day at a church service. And now I have another piece of news that I just saw saying it wasn't a church service in person. It was a virtual one that she was going to view with a friend. It kind of matters because the only reason we talked about it was because we were saying she was part of the church community. So if she was noticed to not be there, she was known in that particular environment. Maybe it was somebody from that environment, like anybody who could have been in that environment. So that changes the way that we are talking about it now a little bit.
But a little bit. Because she still visited with a friend, I guess, regularly. And apparently she stopped going in person around COVID is what I read about that.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah.
So this is another concept that we've talked about before, which you mentioned history, right? So there's a famous quote that journalism is the first draft of history. And what I tell my students is that if you look at those first drafts, if you look at the early reporting for Pearl Harbor, for 9/11, for any school shooting, for any true crime case. And we've analyzed Maura Murray, the first month of coverage, and other famous cases, first couple of weeks of coverage. The first draft is always rife with errors because things are happening quickly. Even the police, the FBI don't have time to absolutely confirm something. Rumors spread. And they become reported on social media and people report them and we just don't know. It maybe takes a week or 2 weeks to confirm something and and today in this world, nobody's going to sit on anything anymore. There used to be a news cycle where, like, for example, a newspaper would say, well, we're going to sit on this for a while until we confirm it. It's very hard to do nowadays. You're so afraid of somebody else scooping you And that can be legacy media, industrial media like NBC News, or it could be independent, true crime. So swirl is really right. There's like a dust storm. We have a couple of those here in West Texas, and you can't quite see clearly, and you're going to have to wait for the dust to settle to see what exactly happened when. The black gloves. Now, everybody go out and search 5 miles around your home. And I always say this, and I had 3 years ago, I had a student exercise where I did this. I said, we're going to go look around campus to try to find anything suspicious. Yeah, this was awesome. Just a fun exercise about, like, if you take any, 3 square miles on planet Earth and look around. The groundskeepers at Texas Tech do a fantastic job. So actually, we didn't find that much, but we found a rubber glove. We found a brown stain on a door, which I'm sure was paint, right? Like, or dust. So the point is
blood.
Yes, I mean, I don't think it was, but the point is that when you search any place, you're going to find things. And you go back. I mentioned Jack the Ripper. Still today, people debate whether or not any of the so-called contacts and poems and letters written by somebody who said he was Jack the Ripper, who was the murderer, actually were real. That's the other thing, is that we live in a saturation media environment, and so we're being hit by thousands of little factoids that we don't know yet whether any of them are actually correct. And where she was going. How many times have you done a case where it's still debated what somebody was doing the couple of hours before, like what their intentions were? Were they driving north or they're driving south? Maura Murray, we keep going back to, case 0 for you guys, right? Like, they're still debating, what was she doing there? Something as fundamental as that. They're still, I'm on Maura Murray Reddit. You interviewed the person who runs Maura Murray Reddit. People still debate, why was she there, right? Still today.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
Speaking of details like that, this rubber glove that was reportedly found 1.5 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. It's a black rubber glove. It almost looks like a medical glove, but it's black. And I have to say, my own personal bias here, because when I saw the video of the abductor, looked to me like those were medical gloves, and I said to myself that but they could be any color, because the video was black and white. I wouldn't be surprised if they were white, blue, black. I don't know. But when I saw this picture, it confirmed my bias in believing what I thought I saw in that video, which these were like rubber gloves just like this and possibly black. So I'm more prone to believe that this is the glove that the assailant was wearing.
Sorry, I got to ask this. Are they confirmed to be rubber or leather or latex?
It looks like a latex medical glove in the photo.
That's sort of fundamental, isn't it? Right? Like, we don't know the provenance of this glove. We don't know whether it's been there, 5 years. One thing I'd like to talk about, which I'm noticing that we have discussed with other cases, about why does, and is it fair for one case of the thousands of people who go missing regularly? Why is one case, and we talked about Gabby Petito, for example, why is one case huge, like saturation coverage, massive coverage? We talk about it. And then, of course, there's many, many thousands of cases that get zero attention. And you've had guests on, and again, one of the reasons I reached out to you was that you guys were so ethical and honorable about talking about that. You don't follow anybody's lead on this show. I really appreciate that. You pay attention to cases that nobody's paying attention to. I'm seeing a phenomenon here that I had not noticed before, and that is a generational bifurcation about this case. When you go on social media that trends young, and Reddit trends young, the average Redditor, maybe not at Reddit, contracting or Reddit vintage 70s photos, but in the more popular large scale Reddits, especially the ones that sort of deal with issues of the day, I'm sensing that a lot of people there are Generation Alpha and Generation Z, or they're people basically in their teens through their early 30s. Whereas Facebook, you might have a lot more people in up 60s, 70s, 80s on Facebook. For the morning show, for whatever channel, you're definitely having I say older, like people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. I really don't think many of my students watch Good Morning America type situations. Okay, so what's happening here? NBC interrupted the Olympics for a development in the case. That was a huge story. Not the story that they wanted. Here's something on the case, but like that they interrupted the Olympics. And I think that it didn't quite break young people's social media, but it became a massive topic of saying, why is this case getting so much attention? Like younger people going like, oh, this is just because there's a TV personality involved. Now, I'm just reporting this. My job is to observe, not push people in any direction. But I'm noticing a lot of young people on social media, TikTok, Instagram, really asking the question, like, why are we interested in this? Who else went missing on Thursday in Nebraska or Florida? Young woman or an older man or whatever. But like, why are we paying so much attention to this case? Remember when we talked about Jodi Huisentruit's disappearance, who was a newswoman who was abducted and is still missing, right, from a long time ago. And I mentioned that in interviews, people within the journalistic community of Mason City, Iowa, talked about the fact that they felt that they had to balance some things. Like they were self-conscious, like, are we covering this case too much because Jodi was our friend and our co-worker or worked in our industry? They tried to say we were covering it enough. It was objectively a big story for a news anchor. Actually, she was a morning show co-host, to be kidnapped in a relatively small town. There's no way to argue that wouldn't be a big story. So they felt justified with the amount of coverage. I don't know how much that conversation is going on now. With my friends who are still practicing within journalism, though, they are saying this is going to be an issue. This case is huge in the Good Morning America demographic, like in terms of who's paying attention to this case. Women especially, but people who are middle-aged and older, this is a big case. Somebody's mother, grandmother, disappeared. But that's something interesting that I just had not seen with that level of acuteness before. And I'm interested to see in the future whether that develops with cases too.
Well, it would be interesting if like Reddit was around when the Lindbergh baby was abducted, because that got huge press as well. So how would Reddit be handling something like that? And would people be saying, oh, it's a child of a rich white guy, so that's why we're covering it? But I feel like as much as we do try to feature as many stories as we can from families and communities that don't fit into, the way Tim and I look, I feel like Nancy Guthrie kind of stands out as sort of a outlier here because of her daughter, because her daughter has a massive platform. And what are you going to do on one of the most popular morning shows in the country as an anchor? Not talk about your mom's abduction and not try to use that to make sure that the world knows and have daily updates? This has been something that's happened generation after generation. Frank Sinatra's son was famously abducted as well, and that's Frank Sinatra, using his platform.
Again, I love to have these discussions with my students because until they show up in the classroom, I don't know what they don't know. I don't know what their opinions are until they've expressed it. And I've watched now, I guess, 30 classes of college students go by, and sometimes the trends shift, right, in their view. Many of them are vaguely aware that there were big cases in the past, right? I think Lindbergh baby doesn't appear on their history screen. Maybe Jack the Ripper does because there've been so many movies. Think about, Lindbergh baby, I think there was one TV movie, but Jack the Ripper, there've been like 4 recent movies, I think, there. So it's something that keeps coming back. Black Dahlia, people are still producing media content on the Black Dahlia today. So they are aware that there was saturation coverage, and the coverage of missing, murder, and mayhem is wildly uneven. That's just a natural fact. They understand that. I guess this is not an advocacy statement. I'm just saying it's interesting to me that this is the first one where I think a lot of young people feel that there is a problem of like, why is one person getting so much more coverage than another person? I don't think it's mean-spirited in saying like we should shut up about this, or like, why is this person talking about her mother? Again, I don't have the social media people in front of me, but my students are very empathic people. They're just generally kind people. You know, we have raised this issue before, right? And we've addressed this issue before. I find it interesting that in the past, I needed to bring it up to my students, and now my students are bringing it up to me. The media issue has become part of the issue. And my prediction will be, if I can make a prediction, is that in the future, they're going to ask that question about every saturation case, including the ones where they, like Luigi Mangione, right? That was one that skewed very young in terms of massive attention and interest in him. In that case, it was people saw that there was an audience for younger people there. So it's almost the opposite of this case. Right. Where there was less interest, I think, for older people in that one. So it's just a phenomenon that I think we're going to have to take into account in the future.
So I think with Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, I think there's something I just wanted to point out here, that because of the ticking clock of her not having medication, and then the idea that there is a ransom element here, because why else would she have been kidnapped, abducted from her house? So I think those two parts of this make it so people are expecting a break like any minute. So they keep searching, they keep looking, keep Googling it. I find myself doing it because it's a surreal story and it's got to have an ending that happens soon, or else it can't be a happy ending.
Yeah, I just want to back that up. I totally feel like that ticking clock element gives it that very cinematic quality.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. If this was a thriller movie, some of the elements would make sense here, right? In fact, you can just imagine somebody pitching a Hollywood screen. Well, there's a movie star, or there's a famous news anchor, and her mother is kidnapped, and I mean, just absolutely some of these fit what we expect, right? And as opposed to some other cases, which certainly have gotten a lot of attention, some of the disappearances, but sort of like there's nothing there, like just somebody disappears, and then there's complete blankness after that, right? There's not even any evidence ever found ever again. I believe in the Jodi Huisentruid case, they had all the evidence of some that looked like somebody being attacked as they were getting into their car in the parking lot of their apartment building. I think after that first crime scene, I believe there's never been any actual evidence revealed, at least released by the police. And quite a number of the crimes you've covered, there's this big blank spot after whatever was the initial event.
Absolutely. And I think that blank spot is where a lot of people fill in their criticisms of investigations. What were they doing during those times? And we always talk about, like, ad nauseum, we talk about the CSI effect. Well, there's also that like 72 or 48 hour effect as well. And that kind of theoretically does have a little accuracy to it. But that period of time where there's nothing happening publicly, there could be an investigation going on, a hardcore investigation, but when people don't hear about it, then they think that the investigation isn't commencing the way it should be, because they need that hour by hour update where developments are coming in. So also, I want to get your opinion on this. I was texting with my neighbor who's a nurse, and she had mentioned she's not a cardiologist, but she knows, many cardiologists, and pacemakers typically have alerts when the heart rate goes outside of what it's programmed for. Hypothetically speaking, if Nancy dies and her pacemaker alerts that there's no longer a heartbeat, how would the family and the media treat that if they wanted to fully execute justice to the perpetrators? Would they come out and say that her pacemaker had stopped working?
That's very interesting. We've had the discussion before, and I've had discussion in class with other people who study this about how hard it is to write murder, mystery, mayhem plots for television, even though the detective genre is massively popular. To have a crime occur on TV or in a movie, in a digital game, and it be plausible that people can get away with it without detection, especially of where people are, is getting increasingly difficult. And I'm just going to throw out an example. I don't think I'm ruining anything, but there's a movie that I find very interesting called Begonia, starring Emma Stone, that came out a little while ago. Extremely disturbing movie. It does fall into the true crime genre, though, because I mean, it's given away in the trailer that, like, she's kidnapped, Emma Stone's character. Okay. I have a problem with that. I mean, I have a problem with the kidnapping, but like, I have a problem because she is driving an ultra luxury car, like a $200,000 car, and the kidnappers steal her car. And have you ever started up your car and it says, is it okay to send data to Mercedes-Benz or Ford or something like that? The newer cars
not really capable of doing that.
I think your 73 Olds Cutlass Supreme probably doesn't have that, Lance, but most new cars have. They're continually sending data. There's a black box in our cars. And by the way, even if you decline, it'll say, well, we're still going to send some data. So I actually have a real problem now with any plot that involves taking a car from point A to point B. Right. And I know this was not the case here.
It's kind of the case. I mean, I get where you're going with it.
We have our iWatches, our Fitbits or whatever. We have our phones. Yeah, you don't know what's inside somebody nowadays, too. I mean, there are not just pacemakers. I was looking this up. There's other devices, people, especially somebody older might have something for their digestive system or their renal system or something like that. And you wonder, like, okay, I mean, I understand why the FBI and the police aren't like updating us on this. The technology part is becoming part of the story, too. There needs to be more explanation now about like how something couldn't be traced, especially cell phones. Like, again, I see these TV cop shows sometimes where somebody is kidnapped. They have somebody's phone. I'm going like, can't they follow my phone by a satellite and even listen to what I'm saying? I mean, I know. Then I'm watching a TV series about a Secret Service agency, and they can listen to our phones. So I don't know why the two can't be brought together. That's part of the fascination of the story. Is that this is very low tech, like a masked intruder with rubber gloves. That could be 1940s, right? But then cameras, and you think about how many people, middle class people and upper class, have cameras, and then this technology all makes it more fascinating as a case.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
Yeah, a lot of people have cameras on their houses now, and I really can't believe that there hasn't been video or images of a vehicle of interest. Was that abductor walking? You know what I mean? Like, how is that possible that there is no video that we know of the person, what kind of car the person was driving?
From somebody else's house.
Yeah, sure. Any of them in the neighborhood. Oh, shit. Sorry. I muted you for a second. Go ahead.
It's not just the Guthrie house. Nowadays, they're reconstructing. You see, if you go online and look under YouTube police activity, or there's thousands of YouTube channels of crime, they'll pull in neighbors' front-facing camera and their Ring camera, and somebody had the package delivered at the same time or something like that. So there's just so much now that feels like CSI in terms of especially cameras. Like, there's so much space in America is covered, and Britain London is famous for this. Like you can't walk in any street in London without a camera being on you.
If you don't mind, I really do want to get both of your opinions on the pacemaker question. If it was registered as no heartbeat, what do you think the media and law enforcement would do working together to move forward? I really am genuinely curious what both of you think. I mean, that's a huge question for them. If this happened 4 days ago and it showed that her heart stopped, how do you proceed there?
I'm not sure that they can get that data. I don't know how that works. Maybe the hospital can. Apparently, it was disconnected from the app on her phone. So I don't know how they would read that, maybe just through the manufacturer or through the doctor's office or something like that. But I think that's a good point. Like maybe because Savannah and her siblings have been saying they think she's alive out there. They're certainly pursuing the idea of this ticking clock. But I will say, I don't know that I've heard a lot about her medication since her initial disappearance. Makes me wonder if the abductor actually took it.
Yeah, that's a good point too. And I know that her pacemaker, I know that was disconnected from the app, but that information is still registering to a medical facility.
I would think so, somewhere, yeah.
I don't know about that. When I looked this up like 2 days ago, I didn't become an instant expert on pacemakers, but like apparently there's different generations of pacemakers. So like you'd have to know like how old is this pacemaker, especially since she's an older lady. I mean, when was this put in? Going back to what Tim, I think, just said about it doesn't broadcast. It's not like a GPS, but it does connect to a home monitoring unit, which could also, and I mean, I know people who have other medical devices that connect to their phone, but also a home monitoring unit that then connect through a cell phone connection to a doctor's office. So like before your doctor's appointment, your doctor can log in and get your scan for different medical conditions. But there's a chain there that if that chain is broken, I mean, this is, again, why this is among the things that's intrinsically interesting case. Did this person who committed this crime know about her medical condition? Again, we still don't know whether this is random, like somebody decided to break in to somebody's house and found somebody home. I mean, that's the most random scenario, right? Too targeted, I'm going after this person. And then you think maybe that person, the criminal, knows something. But in terms of the pacemaker, as I understand it, it connects to a home monitoring unit, which could be your phone or like a box, but it needs that level of connection, right? It needs that second unit.
What opinion I want is, do you think it would be responsible for police and the media to work together to either say the pacemaker has stopped registering a heartbeat or just not say anything?
Yeah, I mean, just from the police point of view, I would think that they would not say anything because they wouldn't want to give away what they know, unless a certain amount of time has passed where it might be clear what's happened. But this goes back to what you both said, is that part of the interest of this case is that you could just imagine if this was a TV show, there'd be a giant clock, ticking of like time somebody needs their medication or needs this or needs that. I mean, let's go back to what you always have done, and this massive sympathy for this poor family, this poor woman who did not deserve any of this. And nothing we say today takes away from the fact that whoever did this is a terrible crime. And we certainly hope that there's hope for a resolution where she's brought back to her family healthy and safe. But all these elements make it perfect true crime. Absolutely. I would say nothing in answer to your question, because I mean, the goal then would be capture.
And I feel like they would want to have any sort of information that is not known to the public kept in-house until they control the narrative, until they control what's going out to the media.
I do just want to mention here that it appears the Pima County Sheriff's Office has requested surveillance footage from neighbors that was recorded on January 11th between 9 p.m. and midnight. So that would be about 3 weeks before Nancy was abducted. And I'm pretty sure I saw some social media video of, I think, someone snooping around. Now, I'm not sure that was recorded on January 11th and that is the person that they were looking for, but it seems if I'm reading between the lines, that's probably what it was. So that's interesting to me. Hopefully this helps lead to some break, but yeah, it appears that the residents of that neighborhood suspected that someone was sort of casing the neighborhood.
The average suburban neighborhood, you can imagine there's, 20, 30 houses. Everybody's got cameras. And so I've seen reconstructions, especially in cases that are being summarized by NBC News documentary or somebody's documentary, where almost like getting like a movie set of like different cameras on the same scene sequentially, and you're reconstructing somebody's movements, especially if they've got night vision or lights, bright lights or something like that. So again, I'll go out on a limb and make a prediction that if and when this is cracked and solved, in the documentary, you're going to see a lot of video. I mean, I think one day we're going to see video of like a car on the highway. A lot of video. It's not just a video in the neighborhood, especially when you've got the resources of the FBI. They're going to pull in satellite, right? They're going to pull in Google. Every single car that's been through that neighborhood for a month more than once that isn't traced to a neighbor, they're going to run the plates.
So I was expecting this already, and maybe they have some of this information that I was hearing, a week ago or more than a week ago that they would be using license plate tracing technology from the neighborhoods. And I just haven't seen any of that. Like suggesting that they would have a match between a car that doesn't live in that area that was sort of tracked, I believe, from streetlights, I believe is how I read that was tracked.
There's so much technology now. I personally wouldn't think law enforcement would give us an hourly update on like, we got some new video footage or something like that. They want to wait until everything's correlated and that they can actually do something. We certainly are in a very different world than just 20 years ago in terms of like the possible data that can be used and the computing power, terabytes, many terabytes of data, right? When you've got video and you're trying to compare 75 color videos or something, there's just a lot of stuff to go on. But the FBI has that. Originally, when this happened, and then I started noticing some of these patterns about sort of the demographic of what people were thinking about it, it really just did occur to me. It's a healthy thing to have a conversation in our society about what stories get attention and what don't. I mean, when I teach a class on global communication, I have a couple modules about like, here are some massive stories you heard in the news. Did you know that this was going on at the same time and it received no attention? So I think that that's reasonable to bring it up. It's possible to do that at the same time as feeling sympathy for individual victims and not saying that somebody shouldn't be paid attention to just because the famous people have the same rights as non-famous people. Whether it's in social media, independent media, or what we call legacy industrial media, we do owe it to the public to not always go with what's the sexy story in terms of like all the elements, but to try to cover, as you've done. I'd like to see some stories from the national media about who else went missing this week and maybe some similarities. One of the things you can say, like the Lindbergh baby, let's go back to that, which doesn't get much attention, but that made some huge changes in law enforcement, including the rise of the FBI. If you read like histories of the FBI, the Lindbergh baby was a very important case in changing how investigations happened and like processes, and also the national media about how you cover a case. So I think there's some lessons here. We should all be part of learning them, whatever the outcome is.
Thank you for joining us once again, David. We really appreciate your time and your insight.
Hopefully we can have you back on at some point and we can talk about something that, isn't under a time crunch and, the clock's ticking, and we can sort of have a lighter conversation, because what you bring to the table is really, really interesting. And I feel like we always kind of blanket that with something dark. So hopefully we can have you back on with something a little less dark.
Would love to hear something that isn't dark anymore. Yeah.